Do me a favor. Give me some good advice on how to succeed with your compliance efforts.
Implement and centralize processes to really manage your security and data protection controls. So you not only know what you've already done across some frameworks, but also reduce the amount of time and effort across each, because there can be a lot of cross map.
Good advice. All right. Rich, do the opposite for me. Give me some bad advice on how to succeed with your compliance efforts.
Oh, bad advice on compliance efforts. I think the easy answer is not to have one. But I think even worse than that would be to drive one based on check boxes alone, right? To go through the motions, but not focus on effectiveness.
Oh, okay. Now give me worse advice than that, Faisal. Then not having one is pretty bad.
Don't ever get externally audited, even on those check boxes. It costs money. It's going to be a lot of dollars out of your pocket. You can always self-assess your compliance.
Ah, self-assess. I like it. Let's begin.
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Oh, whoops. Skip to the wrong slide. Or, whoops. What happened here? Do we have an earlier slide? Oh, I clicked the wrong one. I clicked the wrong one because they were in a different order. Hold on. My apologies, people. You know what happened? We re-uploaded something, and what was the first is now the second. Here we go. Today's topic is hacking SOC 2 versus ISO 27001. If you're joining, then you are a compliance nerd, and we welcome you here. An hour of critical thinking about the value of these compliance standards. All right, let's go through this. Our guests, you just met them. Rich Friedberg, he's the CISO of Live Oak Bank, and Faisal Khan, who is the subject matter expert for security GRC over at Vanta. And what do you know? Vanta, they're our wonderful sponsor here. Thank you so much, Vanta. Vanta, by the way, has been a spectacular sponsor supporting the CISO series. So we thank them for helping us to deliver to you as well. All right, lots of different great ways to participate today. Let's just go over the bad ideas and the good ideas. We want to know the fastest way to fail at your compliance effort. How can you do it? Lickety split. Anyways, label it bad idea and also submit your tips on improving in compliance. Just label it 10%. We have our chat room. You can say, bring me on for a question or comment. Ask a question. If you go in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. Please click on that, ask your questions, and vote for your favorite question as well. All right, today's schedule, you saw it, good advice, bad advice, worse advice. We want your bad ideas, we want your good ideas. We'll play the public interest. We'll play the Department of Yes. We'll have your last questions and final advice. And then we'll have our meetup. And by the way, for those of you who are regulars, pay attention right now. Something new with our meetup, and I'm going to show you in just a second. But first, there's a link at the bottom of the screen for our show that we're having next week, which is our June 14th show, 2024, same time we do on Fridays. It's hacking the conversation. That's the key word, the conversation around risk, an hour of critical thinking about how to elevate communication with the business. We talk about this all the time with security leaders. If you click on the link, you will register for next week's event. You will not be taken out of this event. So please go ahead and click that and register for next week's event. And you can still very much be a part of this event. Now, I want to talk very briefly about our meetup next week. It is going to be on Discord. So for you to join, you need to actually be on Discord. So sometime during this event, if you are not currently registered for Discord, do me a favor and register for Discord. It's actually quite fun, and I'll explain at the end of the show what you're going to do when you register, but we want you to be part of the Discord as well. Okay, with that being said, let's begin our darn show. Okay, Faisal, would you just explain for me, because I for some people may not be initiated right now or may only have a sort of an inkling of an idea. Explain to me, what the heck is SOC 2 and ISO 27001? And secondly, why are we talking about these two together?
Yeah, of course. So to start off, both are very common standards in the world at large that organizations use to implement information security and even data privacy and general protection controls for their organizations. I'll talk specifically to ISO real quick. ISO is one of the it's the internationally recognized standards and renowned. It's one of many standards that the International Organization of Standards, aka ISO, publishes for organizations to use and create a management system or governance program to manage your controls, policies, procedures, and ultimately the people within it. ISO 27001 specifically, though, it's all about creating an information security management system, which is a central program for your security policies, your security controls, how you manage the performance of them, and ultimately continually improve your operations against those controls and processes over time. Organizations that go for ISO 27001 will typically go for that as a whole, and it's usually as in response to international world domination, as I like to say as well. The SOC 2 differentiates here, where SOC 2 is a standard for also managing data security and protections, and part of the criteria is privacy, but there are 5 main trust services criteria. There's security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. And amongst those 5, security is the minimum. But it's a little bit structured a bit differently than ISO. ISO has a rigid standard to the specific and explicit requirements of what shall be done and what should be done. That might be a recommended practice. SOC 2, it's all about the criteria, the language of the criteria itself, and the points of focus, which are guidelines as to how you comply with those, how you could comply with those criteria. The points of focus themselves are not requirements. So you could totally meet multiple points of focus and leave 1 or 2 off because they didn't apply. But they're ultimately guidelines and ways for you to create controls for yourselves to then comply with the underlying criteria that's published by the AICPA.
All right. So, by the way, I saw some comments about people not being able to hear us. I'm going to say something audibly, but they texted here. If you ever are watching the show and you have a technical issue, refresh your browser. This solves a lot of issues. All right. If you are still having audio issues, well, you probably can't hear me, but whatever. There you go. All right, Rich, what is your experience personally? I want to set the stage with you in terms of what your experience is with these 2 standards.
Yes, I've had experience through a couple different angles. So I've worked at SaaS companies where we have to produce some of these standard certifications, attestations in the interest of customer trust. But now on the flip side, working at a bank, right, as we think about supply chain risk management, right, these things come into play as we think about the effectiveness of how we're monitoring our supply chain and how we think about the security of our supply chain. I think Faisal hit the nail on the head, right? ISO is far more international. We see less of that day to day than we do in kind of SOC 2s. But overall, that SOC 2 is, I would say, super valuable on a couple grounds, right? One, I don't have the resources to go look at every single company in my supply chain, even the high risk ones. So SOC 2 is some baseline that somebody's taken a look at their program. They've got some reasonable controls in place, and they've had a third party take a look at it and kind of sign off on its behalf, which that in of itself is very valuable. But I think Faisal also hit the nail on the head where you get a lot of variation, right? There's these 5 trust criteria, but exactly what's produced in that SOC report may vary, and it's an assessment of that organization's controls as they write them. So there's a lot of variability in the actual controls that you see in those SOC 2 reports.
Both of you, I'll start with you, Rich, on this. What is your experience on blowing it with these? Or is it, and I'm saying, does anyone massively blow it, or just everyone when they're starting out just because they're green makes mistakes? It's inevitable. Rich?
In terms of reviewing them and understanding them, or actually creating one?
Both. You take it from either side. Yeah.
I think from the aspect of creating one, organizations will sometimes be a little bit too aggressive and want to jump right in. And the only thing worse than not having one is producing one that says you have a whole bunch of control failures that then highlight a bunch of issues that your customers are going to be concerned about. So I think it's important to make sure you plan out the approach for how you're going to get from point A to point B. And particularly for things like SOC 2s, there is a path to get there, right? There are type 1 assessments that are a point in time assessment, and then type 2 assessments that look kind of over a broad period. So for organizations looking to implement initially, it's often helpful to do a type 1, get that point in time snapshot, know your controls are effective, you're aligned with your auditor on what that attestation is going to look like, and then move to a type 2 where you look at it over a period of time. So I think that's the how to approach it. On the flip side, in terms of reviewing them, I think that variation in both controls and which trust criteria are accounted for in the SOC 2 report is incredibly important for folks like me in terms of reviewing how much trust and reliance I want to put in that SOC 2 report. Did they cover all the trust criteria areas? Did they think about the controls that worry me in terms of data protection? And is there an attestation and testing against those specific controls that I'm concerned about, or did they leave those off or leave that area off entirely?
All right. By the way, I want to remind everybody that you can send in questions that you have about either of these. These are two experts that spent a lot of time on both of them as well. I maybe I'm just going to answer this question as I ask it, and you could just nod your head and say, good. But because people are talking about, and you mentioned it earlier, people seek out ISO 27001 because it's more international. Yes? I mean, is that the main reason?
There are a couple. I think one, it's internationally renowned and recognized. You see customers in EMEA. You think about Singapore, Japan. ISO 27001 is usually that baseline standard that comes up earlier on in the conversation, or is under that, hey, what certifications for security and compliance do you have? It flips picture, right? When you come to the North America side, SOC 2 ends up being that number one priority in terms of compliance and being able to showcase some of those security practices. I'd say that customer request and international recognition is a very big part of it.
Yeah,
okay.
I would agree with that, but I'd also add that we were talking a little bit about the variability in SOC 2, the fact that it's testing specific controls at the organization as they write them. There's some variability around the trust criteria and areas. Or one of the benefits, kind of as I'm looking at suppliers of the ISO certification, is it has a defined scope. It has a defined set of controls. It is more prescriptive, right? So there's less variability and kind of, a different level of scrutiny that I would put on reviewing an ISO certification versus reviewing a SOC 2 certification.
Mm-hmm. What have been your personal failures with these? I mean, I was asking more of a grand thing, but let's get down in a little bit into the details, and maybe Faisal, you can just say like problems you see your customers having, like where do they struggle?
I'd say time and resource use across both is one. When we think about personally speaking, and from past experiences, I've been in organizations that do one or the other first, right? And let's just say they do SOC 2 first. SOC 2, if I think about it as from a security trust services criteria perspective, has a lot of overlap to what ISO 27001 inherently requires. I'd say that there's probably a good 60, 70, 75% overlap in terms of inherent control requirements. Because of that overlap, it's tough to really know across all of ISO 27001's clause and annex control requirements, what have you already done? What are the additional things you need to focus on? And what are you okay to less worry about per se? And that's where, small plug here, a tool like Vanta is a perfect fit, a compliance automation / management tool to help you see how you're compliance across both aspects.
Actually, let me ask you, Rich, what has been your experience of how you deal with compliance? Do you go it alone? Do you work with a partner? What's been your past history?
I think both, depending on the organization, right, and the kind of internal capacity. I think when it comes to generating, your own kind of compliance program and kind of building a compliance program internally, right, it's often helpful to do a mix, right? It's often challenging to get kind of the breadth of expertise if it's a small and growing organization, right, and leveraging a third party that is going to help get you audit ready. And help enforce consistency across controls, repeatability, et cetera, can be valuable, but certainly possible to do some of that stuff in-house.
And I'm just asking questions. I don't mean any of these to be leading by any stretch, but is it kind of like insurance on the front end? Because if you don't do it, you're going to be paying dearly on the back end? Or assuming, and I'm asking, getting a partner, is it insurance on the front end so you don't pay on the back end, or that's not it? I get Rich to answer that one first. What do you think?
So I'll answer it. I think in the context of standing up your own compliance program with the goal of achieving ISO certification or SOC 2, right? If you fast forward to the end, right, you're going to have an auditor that's signing off on it. But it's I think the question of how you get from point A to point B and how painful it is internally within the organization, right? So that's where, I think it can be helpful to have, outside experts make sure you're crafting the program right, so that you kind of limit the rework between getting from point A to point B. But I also think about efficiency, effectiveness, and things like automation, right? These, I think there was a comment made earlier, right? This compliance stuff is expensive, right? And it's a lot of work that's, not actually implementing the controls. So I think the more you can build processes to drive consistency, that then you can automate for repeatability to make it easier on those audits, those attestations, and kind of drive that compliance program, the better. And, leveraging third-party partners and various tools to do that is often helpful.
All right. Actually, before you answer, we got our first game here.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right. Rich, one of our producers, has created this game. I have not seen these questions at all, so I'm going to play along as well. And we're all going to play. And Rich, there's just 4 questions. Quite simple here, but quite difficult to get all 4 correct. You will see our audience will play along as well. So let's see. You'll see how this game works. Most average monthly search queries. Now, this is over all searches through Google, so it's not people just specifically in security. Attestation, which you were just saying just moments ago, Rich, or certification. What gets more searches? What do you think, Faisal, Rich?
I'm going to go with certification.
I'm going to agree.
I'm going to go. I think we're going to get 3 Bs here. I mean, in fact, everyone's going B. We'll be amazed if it gets an A. Let's see what happens. Correct answers. Holy crap, we're all wrong.
Oh, my God.
I cannot believe we're all wrong. We're all out.
So surprised.
There's absolutely no one is going to get 4 for 4 this time. That is a wow. I thought we were convinced. Rich feels very proud of ourselves, proud of himself for getting us. All right. Internal audit, continual improvement, or corrective action.
I'm going to go with
what they're
internal.
searching. What?
I'm going to go with internal audit. I think that's going to come up a lot because it's not just ISO, but if you think about internal audit as a function, it should be searchable a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to say C too. I'm going with you on that one. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I was initially drawn to D&E, but I think that's more reactionary after there's a problem. So I think when I think about mass volume,
how do I do
C.
internal audit? How do I? There's a lot of E's. I see a lot of E's in there. A lot of people think corrective action. Let's see. Ooh, corrective action, internal audit. We're a tie. There you go. All right. Okay, so we're 1 for 2 right now. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Now, we all know CIA means a couple of different things here, or at least a couple.
This one's tough. Confidentiality is probably what I'm going to go with. I'm a toss up with.
I don't know. I'm going to go CIA on this one.
All right, I got to round out to be different. I'm going to go with availability.
Okay, we have an FG and an I here. What are we thinking? Oh, we're all out. Oh, we are not good at this game. Actually, I was thinking integrity as second too, but man, I blew it. Well, way off too. I was closer. Here we go. All right. AICPA, ISO, PDCA, TSC. I don't know all of these. I'm going to just go with ISO because there's also a camera reference in there too.
I'm going to go with ISO as well.
What do you think?
I'm going to round out consistency here. I'll go with ISO as well.
All right. We're all going to win or we're all going to blow it. Here we go. We all blew it. TSC. Oh, jeez.
At least it was the second largest.
All right. We really, that is pretty bad.
Prizes
for
for
runner-up. That was awful. All right. Faisal, I was about to let you, I cut you off from answering the question about working with partner, but this actually is a nice lead up because I actually do want you to tell, and you tipped it a little bit earlier, but I want to give you this opportunity to just explain what it is like working with Vanta, why somebody, if they're seeking out SOC 2 or ISO 27001, why they would want to work with Vanta. So give your pitch. please.
Yeah, definitely. So Vanta as a platform and company, we offer a overall trust management solution. So it's not only compliance with frameworks, but if we think about common functions that security programs have, like risk management, access reviews, questionnaire automation, we have modules for all those things as well. But at the core of it, especially to what Vanta started off with, it was to how to automate compliance journeys. And we started with SOC 2 and ISO 27001 as that bread and butter as frameworks. So we, as a platform, provide you that out of the box list of what are the list of controls relative to SOC 2 and ISO 27001 that you need to worry about or consider, along with integrations that we key off of for automated compliance perspective, whether it's your cloud service provider, your identity provider, your version control systems, and so on and so forth, surface those as tests. And anything that can't be automated, which the reality is you can't truly automate 100% of an entire compliance framework, or it will be very, very challenging to do so and for it to apply for everyone. There will be documents with guidance on how to comply with it. So we provide customers that roadmap on how to get compliant from a SOC 2, ISO 27001, and other frameworks as well.
All right. Well, if you would like a little help from our fine friends over at Vanta, partnering with an organization that has actually done this more than once, guess what? We just put up a poll. Is a poll? Oh, I'm putting it up right now. I'm making it visible. There's a poll. Would you like a warm handoff? To learn more from Vanta, click on the little bar chart in the right-hand side. There's a bar chart there. That'll take you to the poll. And you can just click on one of those options, and we'll give you a warm handoff, and we'll make it easy for you. That's what we're all about. Let's make it easy. All right. Rich, I'm looking at something that Peter Gregory said, and I'd like to get your take on this. We were asking for 10% tips, and Peter suggested a 50% better tip, and that was combine the SOC 2 and ISO audits into one combined audit. I would consider that, I guess, a super audit like we do. He does this. Have you done that before? Combine it, and does it make it a super audit?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of driving as much efficiency as possible, right? So doing two separate audits when there's some level of overlap doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of, whether it's SOC 2, ISO, or a bank, we've got lots of regulatory frameworks. There's the new SEC requirements, like you name it. There's a handful of efforts, the unified control framework, the secure control framework, that try to map these things together, right? To get you a kind of set baseline of controls that will ideally meet multiple end goals, right? Whether it be ISO, SOC 2, the regulatory compliance, et cetera. So then getting that consistent control language that gives you benefit across multiple areas and running them as a single audit, I would certainly be supportive of. It's a great way to gain some efficiencies.
And I'd love to add on to that too.
Go, please.
Yeah, so, and just speaking firsthand, especially the very first time I approached SOC 2, then ISO, when we think about the auditing processes for each, especially on the external audit side of the house, if you do them separately, it's a lot of audit fatigue because there's a lot of the same policies, procedures, evidence that you need to reuse for compliance for ISO 27001 as well. And granted, there's more evidence likely from a process and deliverable perspective, especially when we think about what ISO as a rigid framework kind of requires. But their cross overlap is massive enough for you to do a combined audit because the scopes are generally the same and it reduces that time and effort.
I want to remind people that we have a link at the bottom of the screen to register for next week's Super Cyber Friday. Please click on that, if you will, and register for next week. It's hacking the conversation about risk. Should also be a very good conversation as well. And why do we not have a single question in the questions? This is a shocker. We're now 24 minutes and I've yet to get a single question. Please ask some questions. I'm going to go to my own for that. Maybe the answer to this question is, what you guys were saying, but is the answer to using the standards to build out a wider security program just combining them, or is there something else to it, Rich?
There's a little bit more to it because in some cases you can't just combine because they're written a little differently, or one may be more prescriptive or strict than another. So I do think there's some needed kind of structure around figuring out what's the right control for the organization that meets kind of the multiple targets and outcomes and building out your internal control framework that aligns there. And, ideally that feeds directly into your SOC 2 program, your ISO program, and others.
What do you think, Faisal?
No, absolutely. I concur. I think that when we think about compliance frameworks as a whole, sure, when we talk about specifically SOC 2 and ISO 27001, there's a cross overlap and there are efficiencies to be gained there. And from an implementation perspective, they tend to globally apply, especially org-wide. But when we think about a bit more prescriptive frameworks that are keyed off of the specific data types. Let's take PCI as example, right? PCI requires specific controls in place to be in place for your card holder environment, or your CDE, and card holder data environment, your CDE, and make sure that there are protections in place explicit for that. And PCI prescribes those explicitly as well. So it just really depends on your business, the services that you're providing, and ultimately the data that you're trying to protect. Which, to just kind of key off a comment that was in the chat, it's always a very interesting thing to see across organizations, how they tend to scope some of these things. And my short answer and usually discussion point for customers and prospects is think about what the objectives are from a protection perspective for the data that you have, that you deem confidential and sensitive to you, your IP. And that usually paves the path for how you can ultimately define what systems, what people, and what locations are in scope for you, because those are three common factors.
All right, we have a question here from Chris Geiser, and I want answers from both of you. I can show you part of this. Having done SOC 2 for years, we are noticing that a majority of clients are still asking for assessments that are incredibly detailed. The SOC 2 report is generally the last question in the assessment. Does ISO over SOC 2 get us past that with most clients, or will it always be certification/audit report plus assessment? I'll start with you, Rich. What is your experience?
It's a good question, and one I spend a lot of time thinking about. Right, is we've got a large supply chain at the bank. I don't want to go do bespoke assessments, right? As much as I can rely on consistency and audit reports and attestations, the better. I'll speak for us at the bank. We're trying to rely on whatever certification reports exist kind of up front, right? And there's lots of platforms that will help review, parse, kind of drive consolidation. But at the end of the day, and as we were talking about with SOC 2, right? It's a kind of bespoke attestation against the organization's controls that may or may not cover all of those trust criteria. So for us, it's a combination of understanding what the scope of the SOC 2 was, understanding those controls, and mapping that to our assessment structure of what controls are important to us at the bank. Are those covered by the SOC 2? Are those covered in a way that we feel it's sufficient, or do we need to have some follow-on questions?
By the way, Chris Kidd makes a comment, which I would assume is the reason anyone's doing this, or not any reason, but majority says, you should also review the contracts. They may have framework requirements embedded into them, such as requiring an ISO 27001 or SOC 2 report. First of all, I think what I've heard from a lot of startups is there's a race to get that SOC 2 report because everyone wants to see it. Has that been your experience, Faisal? And I mean, I'm assuming people are coming to you because they're now seeing they got to do it. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris is spot on with that comment. I'd say that frameworks, not only SOC 2 and ISO, even if we think about regulations as a whole, big dependent on the types of data that you're collecting. GDPR with EU and UK personal data, you're likely to see that in contracts, and you're like to be part of requirements from a DPA perspective, a data protection addendum, to go in and sign and make sure that you're upholding those data protection responsibilities. Ultimately, not only, and I think these are both parallel priorities for organizations, SOC 2 and ISO 27001, they're good baselines and foundations for security programs. And of course, the more you work through improving them and implement it right from a maturity perspective, continual improvement, which is what ISO 27001 is all about at the crux of it. They're certainly great foundational starts for organizations. But there ultimately is also the customer angle to it. What are your customers and even third-party partners asking of you to be compliant with? It goes back to a session we actually had here about a month or so ago on sales and security. Customer trust is a very big part of that equation.
All right, we got a bunch of good questions, and these are actually really good questions, and some that can be answered quite quickly. I'll start with Linda White's one right here. What order, in general, is best to achieve? SOC 2, then ISO, or the other way around, ISO, then SOC 2? Rich, do you have an opinion on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody added in the comments that it depends on your kind of business priorities and what you're trying to achieve. But I would say probably for the vast majority of this audience, right, if you're a service provider in the U.S., right, you're probably going to get more bang for your buck in terms of engagement with customers, facilitating customer trust with a SOC 2. And I also think the added comment there would be it's often probably a little easier to get a SOC 2 than ISO. It is less prescriptive. It is a test on your own controls. You've got some variability there to work with your auditor. You can select which of those trust criteria that you're testing. And as we talked about earlier, you can do the SOC 2 type 1. That's that point in time, and then move to the type 2 that looks over a period. So my vote would be, for most of this audience, it's probably SOC 2 first.
Agree with that, Faisal?
Yeah, 1,000%. And even personally can anecdote to that because in past lives, especially organizations that were NAMR based, North America, my sole objective starting out is SOC 2 because that comes up in a lot of conversations, especially customer facing. And goes back to customer trust. But as we tend to grow those organizations and scale the markets, you start to selling to Europe, you start to selling in Japan, Singapore. ISO 27001 is there. And I think it's a very quick lead on, especially to my earlier comment on international world domination. You're going to have to approach it in that manner. I think it's for the vast majority of the users here too, Rich's point, SOC 2 is going to be first, ISO on the other side. However, if you're EMEA based and you're operating primarily out of there and you haven't expanded to the North America and other North America market, you could flip that. ISO 27001 is probably more relevant from a focus perspective and likely also comes up in those conversations you have with your customers.
Very good point. More good questions. All right, this one we answered twice before, but I'm throwing it up here. Just give us the quick answer here. Which compliance standard works better for international organizations? ISO 27001?
ISO
Yes.
27001, 100%.
All right, we're dropping that. Well, thank you, Willem Taluba. Okay. This is interest from Mauricio. Which of the two will give you better chances to get government agencies, he says, out, I'm going to assume, off of your back, or neither? What's been your experience? Rich?
So I've worked at service providers that sell into the government. I think the unfortunate answer is probably neither, right? They've got their own contract requirements depending on whether or not you're talking about Department of Defense or civilian. There's FedRAMP that plays in. So, I do think tying it back to the earlier conversations though, right? That's the importance of trying to build that unified control catalog that can span kind of multiple compliance entities, right? Especially if you're a service provider that's selling to the private sector and the government, right? Understanding where there's overlap between things like FedRAMP and what you're doing for SOC 2, or if you're going for ISO, and kind of building that into a unified set of controls that you can ideally test and audit once with multiple purposes.
And it also, 100%. I also unfortunately agree. I think if we're talking specifically SOC 2 and ISO, there's definitely going to be additional work and frameworks that you need to consider. NIST 853, 171, FedRAMP, as Rich was mentioning. Those are the frameworks that are likely to reduce some questions from government agencies, but you're still going to have to go through a lot of those processes and implement those more granular controls and requirements to make sure that they're okay with giving you the federal data. Because at the end of the day, why are these customers expecting specific sets of requirements? It's because they're giving us data, whether it's PII, cardholder data, health information, government data, federal data. It all comes down to what are the services and data that you are providing and hosting.
All right. What is the difference? This comes from Lisbeth Kjellgaard. Kjellgaard? Lisbeth, do me a favor. Help me pronounce that last name there. What is the difference between SOC 2 and NIST 2? Not NIST, but or NIS 2, other than US and EU? Who wants to jump on in this? Has Have you experience with NIS2, Faisal?
Yeah, so NIS, so not explicitly. It's very recent. It's a very recent development, especially in the European market. The prime difference that I'd like to call out is the difference between how it's legislation versus the actual legislative act comparative to framework requirement. Right? We think about SOC 2 as a compliance requirement. The AICPA and the public accounting organization has devised criteria from a compliance perspective. There's very great flexibility from a compliance angle. NIS2, from a legislative perspective, is like going to have a lot more explicit and mandatory things that you just need to do to show those common cybersecurity practices that are in place for your organization.
All right, let me go to this next one. Another one from William Taluba, which actually I think this is interesting because we did mention that SOC 2 is probably easier to get, but he follows up and asks, from a customer's perspective, which certification, ISO27001 or SOC 2, would give you the most, or your customers, the most cybersecurity warm and fuzzies, reassuring you that the company isn't just winging it? Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's an easy one for me. I'd go with the ISO certification over SOC 2 for most of the reasons that we talked about before. Right? There's so much variability in the SOC 2. It may not hit all the trust criteria. It's not particularly prescriptive. So if I'm looking at two organizations and one's got ISO, one's got SOC 2, I'd have more of a warm fuzzy feeling with the ISO certification.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would love to chime in too and say yes, I agreed. Also want to just throw in the factor that So SOC 2, because of its variability, can either be very much in depth. It could be a bit more high level. There could be a medium implementation of it where it's too detailed in some regard and not in other regards. It just kind of depends on the controls that you're implementing and the maturity of the organization, how often they've done it, and how often they've matured their controls and added new ones over time. I've gone through SOC 2 reports that are over 200 pages long, right? And why are they over 200 pages long? Yeah, so much fun. But why? Why are they 200 pages long? Because of the lengthy list of control requirements, the massive uptick protections that they have in place. And of course, reviewing it's a pain. But in a SOC 2 report and being able to see that in detail does give me warm and fuzzies. So I do think it really is relative to the implementation. But at a baseline, ISO, if you put them side by side, is likely going to give more warm and fuzzies.
All right. I'm looking at some of the bad ideas that have come in. We're going to play that in just a moment. Why? Oh, this is actually a good question. Why is there such a variance in SOC 2 certification pricing in the industry? Can anyone answer that one?
I can start. Yeah, I can definitely take that. So I think it ultimately is dependent on auditors and the types of services, accreditation, and reputation. Pricing is just going to differ when we think about auditors that are in the Big Four versus auditors that are non-Big Four that might be more mid-market or small business oriented. And it's just based off of not only the experience, but also the time spent and the accreditations that they've gone in and taken the time to go get relative to the standards that they have.
Okay. Rich, have you had any experience with varying pricing in SOC 2 certification?
Yeah, I have. I think it's all over the map, and it's frustrating. But I mean, I think for many of the reasons that Faisal mentioned, right? I mean, there's variability in the audit firm itself, right? A Big Four is going to be very different than a small niche player in terms of what their hourly bill rate is. There's lots of variability in terms of the report itself, right? What's the breadth? Are you hitting all trust criteria? What's your control catalog look like? How complex is the enterprise? But then I think the third, and I'll share a plug for Vanta and equivalent companies, right? It's how easy it is for the auditor to come in and validate the controls, right? So if you've got a nice clean control catalog and a platform that shows how evidence is getting collected, and you've built automation around it, right? That's going to drastically reduce the cost of an audit, and that goes into pricing as well.
Let me ask you this one from Larry Rosen. I think this is interesting. Since you get to decide the scope when going for an ISO 27001 certification, what are some of the reasons for excluding components of your environment, and how does someone looking at that report, am I going to add this part, feel about that when they start seeing exclusions?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one first. So I think it ultimately comes down to that reason that the concept that I was talking about earlier of what are you trying to protect? Like, what is in this boundary that you're trying to define? What are the systems? What are you getting? What are you defining as confidential and sensitive data, where you need to implement specific things to make sure that those are protected? And based off of what you define, system, data, people-wise, and those that are relevant to your scope, it helps really solidify an understanding of, okay, well, maybe you don't need to have specific processes in place for some maybe more niche processes that aren't as critical for your organization and may not risk the business. Scope also has just a related notion of risk, right? And to a comment that we have here from Carlo, absolutely. I think auditors will vary in opinion, not only for myself, but also other auditors within organizations, with other organizations. And there are different viewpoints from a risk management perspective as to what is okay and expected when you look at the exclusions list in a scope statement or the ISMS scope that you ultimately define at the beginning. Common ones that you see excluded are the physical security controls for purely remote companies, if just kind of talking out loud here, where there's no offices, they're using a cloud service provider, and they're all off very SaaS-based. You may not have a lot of the physical security control requirements that ISO illustrates in some of their annex controls, and you can exclude some of those scopes.
All right, I'm just putting this back up again so you can see what Larry's question was. Rich, what about excluding components of your environment?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I don't have too much more to add. But I mean, I think as an organization's going through, right? I mean, there may be maturity reasons that they want to exclude, a particular section, right? Maybe they're not ready yet, right? And you think about just like delivering any sort of product to market, right? You may not have full feature set ready, but you want to get to market with an MVP, right? That may be a reason to exclude certain things. And I think another is again what trust you're trying to instill in the market, right? I mean, if it's a fairly benign service that's using public data and availability is far larger of a concern than confidentiality or privacy because it's all public data, right? Then by all means get to market faster, and instill some trust in those areas.
All right, we have a call that just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right. I have some insanely stupid suggestions from our audience. I want to remind everybody to click the link at the bottom of the screen to register for next week's event. That will change in a few minutes to our meetup. If you have not registered for Discord, go ahead and do that now. I'm going to show you something in just a moment about that. And also, just remind you, if you would like a nice warm handoff to the fine people over at Vanta, go click on our poll and do that. Well, a bunch of you wanted to get just that. All right. This bad idea comes from Andrew Aiken. And I like this. And I'm going to make you answer first, Rich. Here's how it goes. Complete security and compliance audits by organizing a standards scavenger hunt. Employees race around the office and the internet, finding and piecing together random compliance documents and policies. The first team to assemble something resembling a SOC 2 or ISO27001 compliance wins. Why do you want to do this?
All right, so I'm supposed to tell why this is a good idea.
Yes, you
All right,
actually
excellent.
you want to deploy. You're like, Andrew, thank you for bringing this to me. We're going to deploy this tomorrow.
Andrew, that's an exceptional idea. Going through audits is really painful, but anything that we can do to gamify it and kind of distribute and engage the audience and the organization around coming together to achieve our outcome of a SOC 2 report, the better. So I love the idea of gamifying it. Let's crowdsource it across the team and let's get it done.
Good job. Very good. All right, Faisal, tell me why you want to do this.
I think that the more people that you have doing things can greatly increase the amount that gets done and reduce the amount of time spent.
Yes.
And reduce the amount of time spent. So totally, let's do it.
All right, good job. Good job, both of you. Did very well on that round of it. All right, here's the next one. This one's just officially stupid. This one comes from Mauricio. Hire a mariachi band to sing at every meeting with customers and government authorities, praising about how you excel at your SOC 2 compliance. So it's it's like the equivalent of a yes man, but a yes man as a mariachi band. Faisal, why do you want to do this?
Transparently, because I like mariachi brands, so I'm in full support of this idea.
Just that. All right, I'll accept that as an answer. Rich, why do you want to do this?
Oh, these are fun. Everybody in the market that we're competing against has a SOC 2 report. We're doing this to win deals, to make sales, to stand out. What better way to stand out with our SOC 2 report than accompanying it with a mariachi band?
Yes, sir!
No one else is doing it.
We've got a winner.
Good job, Rich. Yeah, that Rich, you close it out very strong with that one. I'm very proud of you. Good job on that one. All right, we have 15 minutes left. I'm going to just show something very briefly, and then we're going to come back to this later. But I just want to show people what it's going to look like when we do our meetup at the end. Again, we're not throwing the link down yet, but I just want to show people what this is going to look like. Showing the full screen image here. So what'll happen is you're going to join, and then if you look, it's hard to see, but if you make this really big, there is a section that says voice channels on the left. You look at the last section that says voice channel, and there's going to be a section that says post-event meetup, or may have changed to cyber meetup. Did we change that? Tell me if we changed that. We may have actually changed the name of that, but you'll see a meetup group in there. I think there's just going to be one link in there. In fact, there'll just be one space to go. Go there and you can join. You can go without your camera on or with your camera on. In addition, you can't see in the screenshot, there will also be a chat room on the right, so you continue to have a chat. So big thing is you log in, you click the link that will take you specifically to the CISO series. You can join the CISO series Discord as well there, and then go to where it says voice channels. Make sure you set up your microphone and your camera as well. All right, but we will be getting to that at the end. This is, if you know that the platform we used before is something called Toucan, it is no longer. So now we're moving to Discord, which actually may be something that works out very well for everybody. All right, let's get to a few more questions we have here from our audience. By the way, you guys had no questions before and then a flood of questions, and they've all been fantastic. So I want to say thank you for getting all these great questions in. This is an interesting one from Cheryl Ryan. What if the SOC 2 is with a fourth party? So they're third party. So your third party's third party, which you think if we did addition would be sixth party, but no, it's fourth party. Do you have success in getting those? Can you get the SOC 2 from your vendors' third parties? Rich, have you ever even tried to do that?
Yeah, we have. When we look at critical suppliers of our suppliers, typically we'll have the best success going through them, right? At validating, have you gotten the SOC 2? What review have you done? Are you comfortable sharing it with us? I think a couple other facets there that I think are helpful to look at. I mean, a lot of those are also consistent across the board, right? So like looking at some of our third parties, how many of them rely on AWS and Microsoft, right? We've also looked at their SOC 2, right? So I don't need to go kind of chase down that rabbit hole. But going off on a little bit of tangent, I do think this brings up another like horror story bad idea, where I would say it is a bad idea if you are asked for your SOC 2 to give your suppliers SOC 2. We have certainly had service providers that we have asked for their SOC 2, and they turn around and hand us AWS or Microsoft or GCP's SOC 2 and say, hey, we're in the cloud. Here's our cloud provider SOC 2. Definitely another bad idea.
Yeah, and also just to chime in on that too, I think that, and Duan actually just hit on this in the chat, some NDAs will generally prevent the sharing of fourth-party SOC 2 reports. The better luck in terms of getting a SOC 2 report from a fourth party is to treat it as if they were a third party to you and go to that vendor yourself. Obviously, it just kind of depends on the nuance. And to Rich's point, for critical suppliers, maybe you want to dive deeper into understanding some of those requirements. But there's also a reason you're trusting the vendor that you're procuring with that's the third party, right? You're trusting that they also have appropriate vendor risk management practices in place. And that also should be measured from the SOC 2 and ISO 27001 attestation and certification respectively that they're getting. So a small modification approach would be to understand their completed assessment from a vendor risk perspective that they completed for that fourth party when they go in and use it as part of maybe the services that are being provided to the customer at the end of the day.
Is there any value, because I know you guys do trust centers and you've seen trust centers, if maybe not the SOC 2 report answering very specific questions people have, like have maybe your customers, or you've ever seen this where the trust center allows for essentially a company who's using one of your vendors or one of your customers, I guess, to come be able to see your SOC 2 or at least ask questions or get some information through specifically the trust center, Faisal?
Absolutely. In fact, I've implemented Vanta's Trust Center offering before in the past for my organization previously too. And it just provides that one-stop shop, not only from a resource sharing perspective. I can put my SOC 2 reports, my penetration testing reports, my ISO certification, gate those from a request perspective, require an NDA as part of the flow. But also trust centers, especially one that I'll call it Vanta's, provides you that continuous monitoring visibility from a perspective of, hey, what controls are operating? What are those control lists that customers should know of? And what's that information like? Trust centers are also pretty good information centralization points for commonly asked questions and even ways to push updates regarding your security posture. Maybe it's updating your subscribed user list at large, maybe it's your customer list, that your updated SOC 2 reports in place, ISO certification, so on and so forth. There's a lot of flexibility, and it just makes some of those sales and post-sales and even vendor security processes a bit easier.
Dr. X asks a question, which is actually a variance of a question that we asked earlier. Actually, Peter Gregory had mentioned that he does SOC 2 and ISO 27001 in tandem. But Dr. X here is suggesting doing it sequentially. And you, Rich, had said, I'm all for not doubling work. So if you do it sequentially, can you still avoid doubling work here? What do you think?
Yeah, happy to start. I mean, I think so. There's certainly going to be some overlap in terms of controls. I do think it's helpful to think about whether or not your end goal is to do both at the end, because that'll likely inform how you craft your SOC 2 controls, right? As we were talking about before, right? There's some variability in it. It's management controls that your auditor is going to come in and help craft the attestation on. So if you can craft those SOC 2 controls in a way that aligns with the more prescriptive ISO 27001 controls, right? You'll be eliminating some of that rework. So you'll certainly have some overlap. You can kind of forcibly create a little bit more overlap if you plan ahead a little bit more at the beginning and think about structuring your control catalog.
And have you had customers do this as well, Faisal?
Yeah, so and especially kind of speaking from Vanta's perspective, we take that evidence centralization approach where at the core of it, right, it's ultimately what is the evidence that you need to show from a compliance angle. And Vanta provides that level of cross-mapping across the standard, let's say ISO 27001, the list of requirements that they have, annexes and clauses, and the SOC 2 controls that we provide out of the box, so that when you do complete your action item to either, let's say, complete that automated test to encrypt data at rest, or you provide an example of a completed access review, it's already cross-mapped within the platform so that you don't have to cut twice.
Okay. Interesting. Will Andrews also adds, when reviewing SOC 2 and ISO, it's very important to evaluate them for inconsistencies. Good tip. Make that a 10% better tip. All right. We're going to come back. By the way, if you have not clicked on the button at the bottom of the screen to register for next week's, please do that right now. I want to wrap this up, but I'm going to come back for final comments from both of you, and then we're all going to our meetup. You're sticking around. If you have not registered for Discord, please do that now. Vanta, they are our sponsor today, and they've been a fantastic sponsor. Thank you, Faisal, to his company. If you've not clicked on the little bar chart to get a warm handoff and you would like that, please go ahead and do that and vote in the poll so we can give you a warm handoff as well. Hey, starting very soon, in about 90 minutes, our cybersecurity headlines we can review. We've got Andrew Wilder, who is the CISO of Community Veterinary Partners. got that out. He has been, by the way, one of our favorite guests because he's on top of it. He's all on top of the cyber news. So you're going to want to join us for that. And that will be on our YouTube channel. So you go to youtube.com/CISO series, or you just click on the button on our events page or on the YouTube channel, whatever, you will find it. You can also subscribe to our YouTube as well. All right, stick around for a meetup. Let's go change that link at the bottom of the screen. Okay, click that link. That's going to take you to Discord. Hopefully you already have an account on Discord. Please get an account on Discord if you don't have it. Click it, and it will say, does it say now Super Cyber Meetup? It's either going to say Super Cyber Meetup or Post-Event Meetup, and it's in the section on the left that says Voice Channels. It's at the bottom, so just go to the bottom, click on that. We're going to all meet in there, and then we're going to do some breakout groups, and hopefully we're going to figure this all out because we did a test on Wednesday, and it worked pretty darn well. So please do that. All right, now a couple other quick things. Do you want to mention here? Whoops, I went the wrong way. Do you want to sponsor the Super Cyber Friday? Well, guess what? You can just email us at info@cisoseries.com, and we'll let you know our next available slots are in July, and we would love to have you. So click the link at the bottom of the screen. Now we have, what do we got? Oh, we got about 3.5 minutes left. I will start with you, Faisal. Is there anything we have not talked about that you want to address?
I'd say not specifically that comes to mind. I'd say if I'm just generally speaking from an ISO 27001 and SOC 2 perspective, it's ultimately understanding what your organization's objectives are and picking which framework you want to focus on first, whether it's one, the both, or implement them separately, even sequentially. Mm-hmm. And relative to the data that you're trying to protect at the end of the day to help you define those boundaries for certification and attestation, respectively. They're awesome. Very similar standards altogether.
Excellent. All right, Rich, any last comments from your side?
I mean, maybe I think from both building a program and then as you're evaluating these compliance frameworks. So for building your program, we talked about goals and planning and that structure to eliminate rework, right? That consistency of controls so that you can instill kind of the right message and trust that you want to enable. And then as you're reviewing other reports, right, be careful about that SOC 2 variability. Make sure you understand what trust criteria are in the report and dive into those controls, right? One more bad idea that we didn't cover earlier. I've seen some pretty poorly written controls, like we have antivirus on most of our assets, right, versus all of our assets. So, unfortunately, reading those 300-page SOC 2 reports, right, you can find some gems like that, but it is unfortunately necessary given some of the variability.
All right. All right. Let's wrap this sucker up. Faisal and Rich, try to get into our Discord as soon as you can. Do your best to get in there. That we're hopefully going to be joining us. Everyone, I want you to click that link at the bottom of the screen, and I want to thank Faisal and I want to thank Rich for being here. If you've not clicked on the bar chart to get a warm handoff, please do that. Also, if you did not get a chance to click on the link, guess what? If you just go to cisoseries.com, it will be there on the top page. It'll be on our events page. We will have that all together. Please click the link. Thank you, Aaron. Take us out.